Kings verses 18, verses 20 through 39. So Ahab summoned everyone in Israel, particularly the prophets, to Mount Carmel. Elijah challenged the people, "How long are you going to sit on the fence? If God is the real God, follow him. If it's Baal, follow him. Make up your minds." Nobody said a word. Nobody made a move. Then Elijah said, "I am the only prophet of God left in Israel, and there are 450 prophets of Baal. Let the Baal prophets bring up 2 oxen. Let them pick one, butcher it, and lay it out on an altar on firewood, but don't ignite it. I'll take the other ox, cut it up, and lay it on the wood, but neither will I light the fire. Then you pray to your gods, and I'll pray to God. The God who answers with fire will prove to be, in fact, God." All the people agreed. "A good plan, do it." Elijah told the Baal prophets, "Choose your ox and prepare it. You go first, you're the majority. Then pray to your God, but don't light the fire." So they took the ox he had given them, prepared it for the altar, then prayed to Baal. They prayed all morning long, "Oh, Baal, answer us!" But nothing happened, not so much as a whisper of a breeze. Desperate, they jumped and stomped on the altar they had made. By noon, Elisha had started making fun of them, taunting, "Call a little louder. He is a god after all. Maybe he's off meditating somewhere or other. Maybe he's gotten involved in a project, or maybe he's on vacation. You don't suppose he overslept, do you, and needs to be waked up?" They prayed louder and louder, cutting themselves with swords and knives, a common ritual to them, until they were covered with blood. This went on until well past noon. They used every religious trick and strategy they knew to make something happen on the altar, but nothing happened. Not so much as a whisper, not a flicker of response. Then Elijah told the people, "Enough of that. It's my turn. Gather around." And they gathered. He put the altar back together, for by now it was in ruins. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Jacob, the same Jacob to whom God had said, "From now on your name is Israel." He built the stones into the altar in honor of God. Then Elijah dug a fairly wide trench around the altar. He laid firewood on the altar, cut up the ox, put it on the wood, and said, "Fill 4 buckets with water and drench both the ox and the firewood." Then he said, "Do it again," and they did it. Then he said, "Do it a 3rd time," and they did it a 3rd time. The altar was drenched, and the trench was filled with water. When it was time for the sacrifice to be offered, Elijah the prophet came up and said, "O God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, make it known right now that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I'm doing what I'm doing under your orders. Answer me, O God. Oh, answer me, and reveal this to people, that you are God, the true God, and that you are giving these people another chance at repentance." Immediately the fire of God fell and burned up the offering, the wood, the stones, the dirt, and even the water in the trench. All the people saw it happen and fell on their faces in awed worship, exclaiming, "God is the true God. God is the true God." Word of God for the people of God. It comes from Luke 7, verses 1 through 10. When he finished speaking to the people, he entered Capernaum. A Roman captain there had a servant who was on his deathbed. He prized him highly and didn't want to lose him. When he heard Jesus was back, he sent leaders from the Jewish community asking him to come and heal his servant. They came to Jesus and urged him to do it, saying, "He deserves this. He loves our people. He even built our meeting place." Jesus went with them. When he was still quite far from the house, the captain sent his friends to tell him, "Master, you don't have to go to all this trouble. I'm not that good a person, you know. I'd be embarrassed for you to come to my house, even embarrassed to come to you in person. Just give the order, and my servant will get well. I'm a man under orders. I also give orders. I tell one soldier, 'Go,' and he goes. Another, 'Come,' and he comes. My slave, 'Do this,' and he does it." Taken aback, Jesus addressed the accompanying crowd. "I've yet to come across this simple kind of trust anywhere in Israel. They're the very people who are supposed to know about God and how he works." When the messengers got back home, they found the servant up and well. Reading, word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Never trust anyone over 30. Well, that was true maybe 35 years ago, but been a while. Trust no one. Resist all authority. This was what we lived with what I lived with during my rebellious period. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, back between the Chicago 7 and the Kent State 4, we wanted freedom. We didn't have any use for this stoogey old school and the stoogey old government and the stoogey old religion. We wanted to be free. And we became free. We were free to borrow money up to our armpits with both salaries so we could get a twice the price house, and we were free to get credit cards so we could fill that house with wonderful furniture. We were free to spend and spend and spend and work and work and work to be free. It's kind of an interesting freedom. It's not a freedom of life, it's a freedom of choice. We want to have choices. I remember when I was a kid, McDonald's had hamburgers, French fries, and shakes. And the only choice you really had was whether to have cheese or not, and which of those 3 flavors of shakes you're going to take. That was it. But minimalism is not freedom. Freedom, we want to have an infinite number of choices. We want to go to the big Walmart that has everything. And then we come to this, the scariest shelf in the world. I mean, you talk about toothpaste, you've got to choose between regular and fluoride or spearmint and wintergreen and whiteners and brighteners and anti-plaque and anti-yellow and tartar, yes, anti-tartar, and whether or not it's got baking soda in it. Do you remember why Grandma used baking soda? Because she didn't have to buy toothpaste. She had the baking soda. All those decisions, we stand there for long periods of time trying to make up our mind. You know, Colgate and Crest don't care. Colgate Palmolive and Procter & Gamble are going to sell you a tube of toothpaste. All they want to do is make sure that Pepsodent doesn't have a slot on the shelf. Freedom! And it gets worse than that. Not only do we waste time, freedom can actually paralyze us. There was a study done about companies that offered retirement plans. And it said for every 10 different retirement plans that were offered by a company, they had a 2% less participation in any plan. Because when you have a lot of plans, then you're going to have to make a decision, and you go on with that decision. You got to study on it, and mostly you got to put it off until tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow until you retire and live off of dog food. Paralyzing. Here's a clip from a TED Talk by Barry Schwartz telling about one other area of this.
In other aspects of life that are much more significant than buying things, the same explosion of choice is true. Healthcare. It is no longer the case in the United States that you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you what to do. Instead, you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, well, we could do A or we could do B. A has these benefits and these risks. B has these benefits and these risks. What do you want to do? And you say, Doc, what should I do? And the doc says, A has these benefits and risks, and B has these benefits and risks. What do you want to do? And you say, if you were me, Doc, what would you do? And the doc says, but I'm not you. And the result is, we call it patient autonomy, which makes it sound like a good thing, but what it really is a shifting of the burden and the responsibility for decision-making from somebody who knows something, namely the doctor, to somebody who knows nothing and is almost certainly sick and thus not in the best shape to be making decisions, namely the patient.
We also suffer from what I call religious autonomy, where we have so many choices. And for a majority of the people, their choice is not to make a choice. Freedom is not supported by infinite choices. Freedom comes from who you are and who is your master and who do you trust. Back in the days of Elijah, this idolatry we suffer was very obvious. Well, it wasn't obvious to them because most of the people in Israel worshipped Baal, and Elijah and a few of his followers resisted it. So it was obviously a very popular religion, And like all religions, it involves a demon. I'm becoming to believe that there are such things as demons, and they are in our lives, and they are in us, and that sometimes they rise up and they can promise us the sun and the moon and all glory and great terror if we do not follow them. This is what Elijah faced with Baal. So finally he called for a test. And I love this story. I'm glad that we had the whole thing, because when the priests of Baal were trying to get their fire to light, they're dancing around and they're hopping on the altar and they're cutting themselves and they're making all kinds of noises and all kinds of prayers, and it doesn't do a thing. And that's the way it is with these demons too. When we have all these choices, the fact is none of them do a thing, except perhaps leave us with this nagging feeling we should have made a different choice. Have you ever had that feeling? You get something, and I have this with a car, when I buy a new car, and you finally pick the car you want, and then just as soon as you sit in it and drive it off the lot and it loses a third of its value, you suddenly say, maybe I should have taken the other one. Yeah. I remember seeing a little kid go into a store, and they had all those gum machines. They didn't have gum in them. They had things in little pill boxes. And one of the things offered on the front was a real camera that really, really worked. And the kid wanted that camera so bad and pestered Dad for a quarter, finally got his quarter, put it in, turned it around. Out came the little module, whatever it's called. And inside was a spider ring. Are you happy? Dad asked. I guess so. Are you happy? Elijah's showing that there's no happiness with Baal or these false gods we have, this God of choice and supposed freedom. So he builds the altar. I like the way he said he rebuilds the altar, cleans off all of their junk, puts on the wood, puts on the calf, and then he has them pour on water, 4 jars of water, and then do it again, and then 4 more until the wood is absolutely soaked. And if you've ever been camping and all the wood you can find was soaked, you know what that's going to mean. And yet, Elijah trusted God to the point where you could over-soak the wood. Everything could be so completely wrong as it could get. And yet Elijah knew that God would answer, and God did. You know, back in the days of Elijah and Jesus, illness was considered, they're all illness and sin and demon possession were all considered the same thing. And the people who came to Jesus realized that he had a power, that he could touch you, or he could say a word, or he could do something, and the demon would be cast away. They trusted him. They trusted him in person. They would go just so his shadow would cross them, and they would be healed. But this centurion, this captain of a company of 100 men, he had a slave. It says a slave that he highly valued. In fact, it was probably his right-hand man, his Batman, the one who he loved and trusted for helping him with everything and covering his back in battle. The kind of person you would never want to lose in your life, no matter who they were. And this servant was sick unto death. But the centurion doesn't have to come to Jesus. He sends others to make the request. He even says, I don't deserve having you come into my home. I don't deserve even to come and kneel before you. But I know what I trust, and I know what obedience is all about. And that's important. It's one thing to trust. It's one thing to trust. It's another thing to just obey. And he knows that God will never, ever let us go. It's not about his faith that his servant would be healed, because if he had that faith, if he held his mouth just right, the servant would have been well long before Jesus came on the scene. No, it had to do with his focus. His focus was away from all of the dangers and the worries, and his focus was toward Christ and towards wholeness. See, as a kid, I had a tough time with authority. I may have been my father. I remember one... everybody's giggling. I remember one time, he told me to do something, and I had to have a discussion with him. I'd tell him what I thought. And he said, Dave, if you ever go in the military, you're going to have a sergeant who will tell you to do something. He does not want a philosophical, theological, or governmental, political discussion about it. When he says jump, the only response he wants to hear from you was, if that wasn't high enough, I'll try again. Because he's there to save your life. He is there to teach you to follow orders like duck so fast that the bullet doesn't hit you. It's not just about winning battles, it's about protecting your life. You've got to totally trust and totally obey your sergeant, your commander. In the movie Saving Private Ryan, there's a scene where one of the members of the company sees a little girl out there and he wants to protect her and help her. And his lieutenant says, "Don't, get back here, get down." And he should have listened, because the sniper got him. And Tom Hanks' character says, and that's why we don't save children. Understand? Trust and obey. It's not about some authority out there telling me what to do, which I thought as a young man. It was funny how my father was the stupidest man in the world when I was 18, but by the time I was 23, he was a genius. Those 5 years, he just did really well. He learned a lot. It's not about some kind of a survey proving that God is better than brand X or Baal or whatever. It's about God not only being the authority, it's the authority of the author himself. It's a different kind of authority than somebody making you do something. It's the authority of the one who made everything, saying, by the way, this is how it works. If you travel this path that I lay before you, it will work. You will face problems, you will struggle, you will have your suffering, but you will come through and you will be stronger and you will know who I am. But you have to trust and you have to obey. It's only taken me 33 years to get that through my thick skull. Because what you're obeying is not just any rule. It's not just something that somebody made up so that everyone would straighten up and stand in line and do what's right. The rule is this, and Jesus' rules all boil down to one word: love. All of the obedience is about love. And it's funny, once we get in the habit of loving, we discover that life is pretty good.